To begin this afternoon session, we have a presentation on why every brand needs to act like a publisher or be delivered, and it will be delivered by Timi Siytangco. She is the Director of Brands and Agencies for Southeast Asia, Outbrain Asia. Timi is a digital media and marketing specialist with 15 years experience working in digital publishing and media in Asia Pacific. She led product development at online media companies, CNET Networks, and Global Sources. Timi also has spent time on the agency side as digital strategy lead for Possible Worldwide and Byte Communications, where she drove content marketing programs for brands. She is currently Director, Brands and Agencies, Southeast Asia at Outbrain, the leading content discovery platform on the web. At Outbrain, she is helping brands get the most out of their content by amplifying it across 100,000 premium publishers in Asia and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Timi Siytangco.
So what we do is we're basically a content recommendation engine that powers about 100,000 publishers around the world. So the way it works is a site like CNN will install us, and on the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of CNN's own content surfaced, and our algorithm chooses what to surface based on every single user in the room. So all of us could be reading the same article on CNN and be getting different recommendations from CNN. So the publisher is happy with that because they're getting more engagement on their own site. But we also have something called a content marketplace where publishers and brands can play. So as a brand, you can put your editorial content on here, or your YouTube video, or a slideshow that you've put together, and then you can promote that across the platform as well. Error, Philstar, even NBA Philippines, the Summit slew of sites, and several others. And what this just means is that we have really good reach around the region. A lot of unique visitors and page views, and so. Because of that, we have this unique perspective in understanding how readers consume content online today. So what I wanted to do today is share with you what we've learned from that and why we really believe that brands investing in content is great for the long-term relevance that we want to have with our consumers. So this is just a slide showing who we work with across several brands and agencies. And we're starting to speak to brands and agencies in Manila as well, which we're really excited about. Okay, so before we get into that, we usually want to set a definition of what content marketing is. And this is something that a lot of people in the industry agree with. It's about creating interesting information so that your customers are already passionate about it and they'll actually pay attention to you. So like with the example with Sky Cable today, now they're more memorable to me because they've given me free Wi-Fi. That's good. What's also happening is that if you look at the last couple of years, this whole buzz around content marketing has been really growing. This is just an example of what the search terms have looked like for content marketing in Google over the last 24 months, which is always good to see. We also run an annual survey across the world in partnership with a digital research firm called eConsultancy. And one of the questions we ask them is, do you expect content marketing to become more or less important to your organization in the next 12 months? And so with both the agencies and the brands, it's really something that's starting to become top of mind, which is great. And lastly, there's a bit of, a revolution or a movement afoot in agency land, and some of you might be involved in this already. In the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen a lot of headlines like this, where you have agencies announcing that they're setting up their own content creation units. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Anyone here in agency? BBDO, Fleischmann. We just saw another announcement from Weber Shandwick. They're now producing their own content for their clients. They have a video studio. We have clients, of course, like Red Bull, who have their own media house. So it's really something that's starting to gain steam and something that people in brands and agencies are starting to see value in. Okay, and why is that? It's because we are so inundated with content that we have to take a lot more time when we're trying to figure out what to buy. This is a study from Google. They have a 0 moment of truth study every year. And they found that consumers research 10 and a half pieces of content online prior to making a purchase decision. So that's a lot. So when people this morning were talking about the customer journey, content obviously has a role to play in there because you want to have the right content delivered at the right time when the user is in whatever part of their journey. Also, when we go online, we really are just doing 4 main things. We're either shopping, we're searching for something, we're socializing, and then when we try to discover new things, we at Outbrain believe that we have a role to play in helping people discover things that are interesting to them and relevant. Okay, so what we'd really like to share with you today are the 5 pillars of good content marketing. So there's trust, transparency, engagement, community, and value. And across all of these, I've tried to provide some case studies as well so that it'll help inspire anything you might be doing where you find an opportunity and you know that your brand or agency can produce some interesting content for consumers. So first, let's talk about trust. So the Nielsen Group ran a survey on advertising and trust in advertising last year. And these were the results when they asked the question, to what extent do you trust the following forms of advertising? So at the very bottom are actually the ads that we buy a lot of. So if you look at on this list, you can see ads on social networks. So CPC on Facebook is one of them. Online banner ads are on there as well. Display ads on mobile devices, and text ads on mobile phones. So we're not saying that paid ads do not work. We're just saying that they are the least trusted of all the types of ads that are out there. And that's not surprising. We're kind of conditioned to know that, A, we need ads to get stuff for free. Facebook remains free because of the ads. But at the same time, we also know that we don't really look at that right-hand side of Facebook because we know that's where the ads is, and we care about our news feed in the middle. But then the good news is at the top of the list are what consumers trust the most. So there are things like recommendations from people I know, so word of mouth is number 1, along with opinions posted online. But there's also editorial content, such as newspaper articles. You know, we talk about the demise of print and the demise of journalism, but actually in terms of a trusted source, it's still up there. You know, and I personally think that journalism and publishing isn't going away. It's just changing in format and form. But that whole value of having, you know, a trusted media brand sharing a story with you, that's never going to go away. And branded websites are actually up there as well. So, you know, a brand exists because it's always added value to our lives. And so as a brand, there are some stories you can tell that are not salesy, but will add value to your customer's life. So that, to us, is good news. Okay, so I wanted to show you this as an example of what we call banner blindness. For those of you who are web publishers in the room, you probably recognize this heat map, right? It's the red bits is where our eyes spend the most time. So on a newspaper site, it's pretty obvious that you spend time in the content side of things. And the stuff on the top and on the right, where the ads are areas where people pretty much are conditioned not to look. So that's why they coined the term banner blindness. You know, like you can run ads on there, but people aren't going to look at them. Here are a couple of examples just on brands that have really invested in content so that to the point where they're looking to build trust with their consumers. They're not trying to do a hard sell. This is an example of what Procter Gamble is doing. Now, they started these out of the States about 5 years ago, and they're starting to do it around Southeast Asia this year. They actually own over 100 of these branded sites, and they are around categories. So in this example, they're talking about how to maintain your home. It's all about home maintenance articles. And there's no sales insight, there's no sales call to action insight about any Procter & Gamble brand. It's very editorial in its design. It even has its own title, Home Made Simple. You know, so that's an interesting way that a brand over the long term has really had a commitment to content. And they're doing it to just maintain a relationship with their customers. They're not trying to sell them something every day. And here's another example with GE. You know, like light bulbs aren't the most interesting thing in the world, but what GE does is they build brand on an ongoing basis through their blog, Eco-Imagination. And some of you might have come and seen this. And they talk about technology and innovation, and it's very case study oriented. It's almost like a branded version of Fast Company in some ways. So those are just a couple of examples, and these have both been around for a decade, and so they've started to really gain a lot of value from doing branded websites like this. So the second pillar we'd like to talk about is transparency. So this is something that we took from a female-oriented magazine whose name shall remain nameless, not in the Philippines. I think this came from Singapore. As everyone can see, it's an advertiser, right? You can see the brand on there. But what we also noticed was that it's not marked clearly as an advertorial, and it's something that I think at Outbrain it really drives us nuts, because as a brand, there's no reason why you need to hide under something that looks like editorial. Shiseido has every right in the world to talk about skincare because they're an expert in that. So things like this are things that we believe brands really need to stop doing. Just be transparent, talk about what you know, and consumers aren't stupid. They're going to know that something is brand based, and that's okay. What we actually believe is it needs to look something more like this. So, some of the brands that we help promote their content across our network, like we said. So this is an example of how Boeing does it. So Boeing builds airplanes, and they are an expert in air safety. And they actually have a blog called Quartz that talks all about airline engineering and safety in the air and all of that. And so what they've done is they produce that content, and then they use platforms, multiple platforms, ours being one of them, to promote it across the web. And so here you'll see that their content appears at the bottom of an article as you're going about your day reading what you like to read. And if you happen to be interested in that, you click on it and it goes straight to the Boeing site. So it's transparent. Everyone knows it's a Boeing blog, but because we also know that they probably know a thing or two about airline safety, that's okay, people will read it. And what this also means is that it really helps for word of mouth. Like, as you know, word of mouth is number one in terms of trust. And word of mouth is transparent. It's very easy. It's very hard to fake real word of mouth. And I think as the SEO guy this morning was saying, like, things that like paid mass blogging, that's all going to go away, which is fantastic. And authentic word of mouth will remain. What we've seen also is that there are opportunities now for brands to amplify that word of mouth traffic. So here's another example where Ford, a car company that's been in social media for a long time, uses it to their degree, to their service. So they launch their hybrid cars and they have journalists test driving them. So Forbes in the States wrote a really good review of that car, and they decided that rather than force people to go to the brand website, which may not, it's all branded information, they would rather drive people to the product review because it's third party, it's trusted, it's objective. And so they run campaigns like this with Outbrain and as well as other platforms where they'll promote this and they won't even care about driving you to their brand site, which is refreshing because suddenly you're not having this awful conversation about, oh, we have to have enough number of traffic to our site because that's what we care about. It's actually about making sure that the great content about your brand, wherever it sits, gets the highlight that it deserves. Okay, so third, engagement. So engagement is this word that gets abused quite a bit. We do know, though, that there are certain categories online and certain consumer bases where they've already told us how they want us to engage with them. In this particular example, which is a millennial study, millennials have already said, we want you, the brand, to entertain us, and what does that look like? It could be about help us influence how you create your product, or help answer my questions in real time on social media, sponsor an entertaining event, create online content. So, and the list goes on. So it's almost a playbook for us. We don't have to really rack our brains to figure out how to engage with millennials because we already know how. And so it really just becomes how creative can you be by still staying true to your brand vision, but also entertaining people in a way that they didn't expect. So here's an example of one brand that's done it really well. Have some of you seen this, the Red Bull Outer Space Jump? So this is a really great video.
It's still climbing, and we'll start moving here in a little bit. Let's do a bit of release.
If you're scared, walk away, 'cause there's no need to feel ashamed. Yeah, we all feel the same.
All right, now the whole room working on. I'm going over.
Jumper away. Speed 725. You're showing Felix at a stable descent. And Felix is back to earth safely, the new world record holder.
So it's a great piece of storytelling. And I think that's why Red Bull has the drink side of the business, but they also have something called Red Bull Media House. And the word on the street is that Red Bull Media House now makes more money than the drinks business because they have such a focus on extreme athletes and events that around that they get to license their content out. And it's become another revenue stream to them. So not everyone can be a Red Bull, or should be. But it's a great idea in terms of how a brand can really tell your story in a long-term way and in a way that makes you memorable to your consumers. Another example, and some of you might have attended this one, the YouTube Fan Fest, which happened 3 months ago. I think they did the first one ever in the world in Singapore. And so YouTube sponsored it. It's all these independent bands that no one's ever heard of, except they have these rabid cultish fans that show up everywhere they go. And so that's what happened 3 months ago. And as far as YouTube subscriptions go, they had a pretty decent number of subscribers at 42,000. But the more important thing was that they gained so much earned media out of this. And, YouTube as a platform just hosted something that they knew people would like. And it wasn't so much that they cared about the numbers. They cared that the quality of the fans coming there were just so intently interested in this kind of music. Okay, so fourth, we'll talk about community. So content is a great way of building community. This is an example that McDonald's did. So that's a shot from the top of the McDonald's French fry oil thing. And what McDonald's did, and they did this in Australia as well as in Canada, and I think they're planning to roll it out in other parts of the world, is they opened up their website to their fans, and as a fan, you could ask them anything. And they didn't censor it either. So one example here is, why does McDonald's lie about its 100% pure beef when it's a fact that the hamburgers are mainly additives? And someone comes in there and answers it. And they have a few other questions on here. What is in the fries? Or my favorite, why should I eat anything that has ingredients like dimethyl polysiloxane embedded into it? So it's a really interesting approach that the brand has done because, they still have to sell fast food, but at the same time they know that they listen as well to their community, and they know there's been pushback on, what's in their burgers. And so they decided to do this and be very transparent about it. They have people from the brand answering in detail. And it's just, it's about staying true to what you value, but also listening to what the community wants to hear. And by the way, for McDonald's, this gained them so much earned media that it got written up in the press. And so for them, it delivered a lot of returns on a lot of different angles. And last, but certainly not least, value. So a brand will always be relevant to us if they're adding value to our lives. This is an example from Citibank. So Citibank has always had this program where they're helping women understand finance better and manage finances better. And so they have a brand called Women & Co., which is their own branded website. And they don't talk about their products on it. They just talk about taxes and finances and savings and managing your money and all of that. And it's very targeted at the female demographic. And the reason a lot of brands are starting to invest in this is because you can really see that if a consumer loves your brand, they will take action on your behalf. And a lot of you already see that, I think, if you manage your Facebook pages, and you'll see fans responding to other fans about a product, and then you don't even have to be involved, which is great. But it also means that they'll tell their friends and they'll keep buying it. So it does contribute to intent to purchase, and it definitely contributes to loyalty. So you might be thinking, Timi, all of these examples are all, out of the States or out of the region. Do you think this is really going to work in Manila? And I've had a few conversations here where, digital spend is still low, but it's going up, which is great. But I think actually that there's a lot of really great content coming out of the Philippines, and just from our own research, we love what we see on YouTube and on the blogs. So we really believe that content marketing will work in this part of the world as well, which is why we're here. So one of the things actually that we've seen from the network that we have at Outbrain is that readers in Asia are actually more open to this type of content marketing compared to the States. For example, in terms of the click rates we see on our widget, we get 70% more response from our markets in Asia than the US. What we've also found interesting is that content consumption patterns in this part of the world are very different. As you can imagine, in the States, 96% of what they read is from their own local media. They don't really read Le Monde, or they don't really read, brands from titles from other countries. But in this part of the world, it's very different. So in India, for example, 62% of what they read is local media, but the rest are not. They'll go to a lot of British sites, they'll go to a lot of cricket sites, and those may not be an Indian online newspaper. In the Philippines, it's about 30% local. So I think we read a lot of American titles, and we see that a lot from our data. There's a lot of CNN on there, but there's also a lot of NBA, there's a lot of movie sites, there's a lot of entertainment from overseas. And it's a very fragmented, but also a very promiscuous reader base in a good way. And I mean that in a good way. And Singapore is even lower. Like Singapore is 18% because the population is so mixed there that you just read stuff from all over. And so it means what this means as a marketer is that that whole concept of buying into sites, even though that still works, cannot be your only strategy. You have to go where your audiences are. And in a way, the Outbrain platform, we've designed it so that you can buy based on who the audience is, not just what site they're reading on. So if one of you is on, let's say, Channel E, or reading a Channel E article in the state, which is a US-based site, you can still reach that reader through a platform like ours. Okay, and just one last thing on the content consumption. We really believe that in Asia, people are hungry for content. People read a lot in this part of the world. Again, in Singapore, they're click hungry, like double the click-through rates that we see in the States. In India, I guess because of what their interests are, they're very tech hungry. 30% of all content that's consumed in there is tech-oriented. In the Philippines, we think that people are just hungry because sometimes the peak consumption here is 4 p.m., which we're thinking, they're probably planning to figure out what movie to see tonight, or they're looking for a brain break in the middle of the afternoon. But it's just interesting that the consumption patterns are very different and good for us because people here want to get content online. Okay, so I just wanted to close by saying that we've seen a lot of great content coming out of brands in the Philippines, and we're here in Asia, and we'd love to speak to you if you have any content that you think people should see more of. And with that, I'd like to close with 3 things that I'd like to leave you with on this topic. First, content, not camouflage. Brands need to be authentic and transparent. I think everyone agrees with that. And when we create content, we have to remember that a brand is of value because it delivers something of value. And so when you write something about the brand, then write who you are and write what you can do well. Second, it's about influence, not interruption. If you remember across the customer journey, not everyone is ready to buy right this minute. Sometimes they just need to understand something or get educated. So a brand can come in that way through content. And third, we say go all the way. If you're going to invest in content, invest in it. Create something that will last for the long term, because that's how you're going to build relationships as well on a long-term basis. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Timi, for that inspiring talk.
Thank you.
The floor is now open for your questions, please. Come close to the mic nearest you and state your name, your company, and your question. Oh, come on. Give your brain some blood there. It's not all in the stomach, okay? All right. Well, just to get things going, I'm happy to see that writers are now ruling the world, right? And journalists are still relevant. It's nice to see that media brands and journalists are still among the top trusted sources in online as well as outside of it. Perhaps just a quick one, what brands or segments get the most attention? You were mentioning 100,000 different sites, is it? What brands or segments get the most attention or relevance from target audiences?
That's a really good question. We see across a lot of categories. We see a lot of response for finance brands, actually, because a lot of in finance, they've really felt the brunt of this whole lack of trust issue, and so they've been one of the first to get into this category. So we see a lot from finance just being helpful online, FMCG, so people like Coke, Procter Gamble, Unilever, a lot of the food brands. We're also seeing a lot of lifestyle type brands, so luxury brands, because they're very good at creating bespoke content. There's some starting to come up in travel as well. Yeah, so it really cuts across. And we also do a lot with technology brands, both consumer and business.
But what kind of content do they appreciate the most? Can you tell?
Yeah, no, it really differs from category to category. The main thing we've seen is if something is delivering something of value, and that could be different depending on who your consumer base is, then that becomes something that gets a lot of response. So in a category like makeup, for example, we work with a client, L'Oreal, and they have makeup.com, and it's just makeup tips, and they don't sell their products on there. So that's become very successful for them. For like the Citibank example, it's like how to manage your money better. So it's really something that people find interesting anyway, and they'll read it from a site like ANC or ABS-CBN, but they're also happy to read it on a brand site if they know the brand is an expert in that. Yeah.
Questions? Just a comment, perhaps. You mentioned banner blindness. Blindness. Is there a time you think that people will look at the footnotes or the suggested articles and they'll turn blind to that too?
Yeah, it's a conversation we have a lot. What we see is that lower half of the page below the fold, has always been less trafficked. And so what's happened actually, because recommendation links are on there, it's become a more active part of the page. So right now we're only just seeing it start to become more active. I'm sure, we could have this conversation in 2 years and my answer could be very different. But what we're doing is that we want to make sure our algorithm is always offering the most interesting content in that space. And that's really our job, right? To keep the interest going. And if we don't do our job well, then I guess people will leave it. Okay. Yeah, but it's a good question.
All right, thanks. Questions, please, from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jay-Ann from GLDT. You mentioned that in the last 6 to 12 months, companies are setting up their own content creation units. Does it make more sense for companies to set up their own or to outsource it?
What we've found is that you want to own your voice and your message. And if you already are investing in a lot of content, which a lot of brands have done, then they've started to hire editors and journalists in-house. But at the same time, they still outsource things like, for example, a Facebook page to some degree, or maybe they'll outsource. They'll do something that's partly in-house, partly outsourced. So, for example, the GE site, they own it internally, and they have an internal editor that runs that show, but they will outsource contributors to all over the web. Very much like a publisher will have editors and writers in-house, but they'll also bring contributors on. So it's become this hybrid model that also is helping them become more nimble. Thank you.
More questions? Okay, all right. I guess that's it for Timi. Thank you, Timi.
you.
We'll see more of you maybe later. If we have extra time, maybe we'll have Timi answer them for us.